Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. The Second Chance panel briefing. I'm so excited to be here live in Chicago today with some incredible sisters who right now for the first time are going to talk about their experiences. Um, so this is going to be very, very interesting. It's going to be healing. It's going to be beautiful. And please, add any comments in the chat if you want to talk about these things. But before we start, I'd like to take a moment of silence for Adam Toledo, the 13-year-old who was fatally shot by police officers here in Chicago. God bless him, God bless his soul, and we, pray over his family, his mother, that the justice that this baby deserves will be met. And so, even as the nation grapples with the crisis of over-incarceration and punitive sentencing, we face a parallel and related challenge that threatens the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. Excessive fines, fees, restitution orders, and loss of professional licenses can make meaningful reintegration nearly impossible, and sideline professionals who are eager to make amends and contribute to their families and communities. During today's panel discussion, we will discuss the financial and professional consequences of a criminal conviction and the steps we propose to transform this inefficient and harmful system into a pathway for healthy reentry, personal and professional development, and meaningful contribution. So again, thank you so much for joining. My name is Topeka K. Sam. I'm the founder and executive director of Ladies of Hope Ministries, and this is Second Chance Month. This month has been a month where the White House declared this month to make sure that we are talking about some of the great successes that happen for people who are in reentry, but they also great barriers that each of us face. Even me, having receiving a pardon from the president, I still have collateral consequences that I face just because even people have known and that I had a conviction and their own biases. But what we don't often talk about when we're thinking about transformation, we're thinking about reform, we don't often talk about people who have white collar crimes. So often people talk about, nonviolent first time drug offenses because technically these sentences have been draconian and they have been, systemically, racially biased and all the things that we know because there has been so much reform that has been being pushed around the country for decades now regarding it. However, what we don't talk about, and there's not specific reform that is being pushed around people who have financial crimes. And so the sisters here are our friends of the LOHM Coalition in Chicago, our newest coalition that we're building, and I'm so excited for them to be joining us in this conversation today, and the need to build pathways for equity. So I'd like each panelist to please introduce yourselves and share what it is that you'd like to share. But please, let's frame this around your name, where you're from, what profession you were in prior to your incarceration. And since you've been home, let's talk a little bit about maybe one barrier that you think needs to change. And so let's try to do that in maybe 3 minutes each so that we can leave some time for open discussion. Oh, sorry. Let's start with Roxanne Jackson. Roxanne, I'm sorry, I'm mute so everyone can hear you. Oh, hold on. Remember, this is their first panel, so let's just give them a little time. Let's unmute. Hold on one sec. Okay, Lori, thank you. Thank you, Lori. Lori's going to jump in.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Lori Westerfield. I'm originally born and raised here from Chicago, Illinois, for those of you who are tuning in from Chicago, or streaming in, I should say. Prior to my experience, I was a practicing attorney here in Chicago, primarily Cook County and some of the collar counties. the issue that I'd like to raise, or I guess bring the most attention to, is that as Topeka mentioned, oftentimes white collar crimes, people don't think of the barriers that restitution can cost your life once you return to society, if you will. And in particular, from my personal experience, and as it relates to housing and wanting to purchase a home, and knowing that I had a restitution lien that would last 20 years post my release, it instantly became real for me that it was a barrier, that effectively I would be serving a second sentence because of the size of this lien. It would effectively bar me from ever wanting to purchase a home. And that was, as young people like to say, it became very real for me. And that was important to not only, because we often, as a sisterhood, talk to each other about our challenges, but at some point we realized we had to be more vocal and start advocating for policy changes around these issues. And thank you for Topeka for bringing this panel together to speak to that this evening.
Thank you so much, Lori. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your experience. This is so powerful because, you know, there's so many butterflies and so many sisters call us that are out here, but we are really still imprisoned and trapped in our cocoons because, you know, of this fear that people will know where we've been and not be able to support us in really achieving the goals and the things that we need. So next, I will ask Callie to just introduce yourself, and know that we are here in full support of you.
Hi, my name is Callie Shakin, and I'm from Chicago. Before I was incarcerated, I owned a title company, and I was also a licensed realtor, neither of which I can do anymore. And the struggles that me and a lot of other women are facing is that we can't live our life like we did, you know. I mean, it's we have no careers now. I went from being a professional and you know, owning my own businesses to working at a supermarket. It's difficult, and we're not able to purchase anything. We can't purchase housing. You know, we can't actually purchase anything because at that point it becomes an asset, and the government can seize it from us. So you know, we're trying to change things on, you know, how restitution works.
Thank you so much, Callie. Thank you. Thank you so much, Callie. I know how difficult that was for you, but it is so necessary and, you know, so powerful to hear that you went from, you know, having your own business, your own title company, not being able to practice anymore as a realtor because of the crime, and now having to, as your point, saying working in a grocery store just to make ends meet. And you know, how devastating. People don't understand that not only emotionally, mentally, but spiritually, these barriers consistently are harming us. And the fact that you know, are so nervous right now, even sharing this experience, but it's so beautiful to be able to be a part of the facilitation of this. So thank you so much for being so courageous and brave enough to talk about these issues, so that we can begin to really push the type of policy that we need, so that you or no other sister, or brother for that matter, who's had this type of crime, cannot have an opportunity to rebuild their lives with the capacity and education that they have. And so, Roxanne, you think you're ready now?
Well, let's see. I pushed the space button. Can you hear me?
Mm-mm. So you might have to slide over to Callie. We're trying to stay social distance here, folks, to make sure that we're keeping things. Okay, so see, this is what we do. We share. So go ahead, Roxanne.
Okay.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Roxanne Jackson. And prior to my journey, I was involved in the law. So, sometimes we all make a misstep. But when we do, we have to own up to it and decide that no matter what has transpired, that we are unique individuals and we are full of promise. So no matter what has happened, you still are able to be something spectacular and special. So since I've been home, of course, I've made sure that I've paid my restitution more than I was supposed to every month, because my goal is to be compliant and to rebuild. Some of the issues that have been before us, of course, being involved with financial crimes, is that you can no longer own things without big eyes peering at you. There's issues with credit, and as you rebuild, credit cards are closed, bank accounts are closed. Listen, just because you have a misstep does not mean that you should be prohibited from living a life and leaving a legacy. So as we partner with the Ladies of Hope Ministry, which is doing a phenomenal job, we intend to be something special, we intend to grow, and we intend to empower our sisters and brothers who have had this journey. Listen, if you don't want to give us jobs, we will create the jobs. Thank you.
Now they call me Sister Sam. I don't know now. I'm always the one being called Pastor somebody. I don't know who I need to fact the mic too for that one. But thank you so much. And you were a practicing attorney also, correct? Okay, so I just wanted to share that as well. Another practicing attorney. We got a word just now, but we missed her profession prior to incarceration. So I just wanted to share that. Next, I want to pass this over to my sister Elise, whom, by the way, it's why we're here in Chicago right now, and she reached out to me on social media and began to talk about, like, I'm ready to talk about my experience. I'm ready for us to do certain things. And, people know when they reach out, I always answer the call. And so now I'm here in Chicago. And we've been for over a few months now, just really thinking and building and strategizing around ways to really elevate this issue. So Elise, it's on you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I'm Elise Roper, and it's hard to come after Roxanne with that introduction. Oh, you can't hear me?
No, so do your.
And I unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Okay. Yeah.
Can you hear me now? Okay. All right. My name is Elise Roper. I was a practicing attorney for about 22 years prior to my legal experience. That's what I'll call it. The ladies have kind of summarized what the issues are. My main concern is getting my life back, being able to do what I want to do when I want to do it. The restitution is a big hindrance in us being able to, as has been previously stated, having our own businesses, being able to have a bank account. And the restitution is there for 20 years. So basically, not only have we served time, but we are serving a life sentence with this restitution. So we're trying to find ways to overcome that. And I'm very happy that Topeka has partnered with us on this journey. And we are looking forward to having you, those of you who are watching, to help us with this effort as well. One of the people that was critical in my journey was my defense attorney, Eric Sussman, who is joining us this evening. Eric is a former prosecutor in the white collar division for the U.S. Attorney, and is also a defense attorney. And I thought Eric understands the issues that we are facing, both from the prosecution side. He can give us some insight as to the thought process there. And then on the defense side, since he was very instrumental with my defense. And just as a background, I was caught up in the mortgage industry. And so my restitution is not even a real restitution. And that's what kind of makes it even more difficult, because it's a paper restitution. I think I have a restitution of about $5 million. And trust me, if I had $5 million, I would have put it somewhere. But those are the issues, especially those of us who were in the mortgage industry and got caught up in that and were sentenced for that. These are the issues that we're trying to figure out how we can get out of that. What are some changes that we can make so that maybe after we serve so much time, we can get expungement or sealment. So at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Eric can go into a little bit more detail of his background, and I'll go from there.
Thanks, Elise. I am, as Elise mentioned, I'm a former federal prosecutor. I was a federal prosecutor for about 10 years, and then I was in private practice for a long period of time as a defense attorney, which is how my partner and I met Elise and began representing her. Then when Kim Fox came into office, for those of you in Chicago, she asked me to come and be her first assistant and to help her put in place some restorative and reformative justice programs, including trying to get rid of cash bail and police accountability, some of which you talked about earlier, sadly is not, we're not there yet there. But the issue, and I'm currently an attorney, I'm a partner of Reed Smith Law in Chicago. I mean, the issues, just briefly, that Elise touched on are real in terms of restitution, and what she's telling you about it's not a real restitution. The reality is most of the banks that, according to prosecution, Elise defrauded and suffered a loss. In fact, the prosecution is fairly sloppy, and most of those banks actually turned a profit on those mortgages that Elise did, and then sold them, and they were repackaged. And so really, I'm seeing someone say, ask me to speak louder, so I will speak a little louder. So ultimately, the problem of restitution in any event is something that sticks with you. It literally, in some cases, could go with you even after you die, and they can go after your estate for restitution. And I think obviously it has serious impacts on people in terms of their ability to go on and to lead their lives, to get back to where they want to be, and quite frankly, to get back to where I think everyone wants them to be in terms of being able to be productive and being able to fulfill their potential. So it is a real issue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric. And Elise, I really, really appreciate, again, you coming here and you communicating about the things that you have experienced for the very first time publicly. And Eric, thank you for joining the fight along with us. We do know how critical it is to have people who are practicing attorneys right now, specifically in this area, right, on white collar crimes, and really helping us think through ways to not only change, what we're looking at as it relates to restitution, but also barriers, right, that people are facing because of it. And so I guess just for some context, if you will, before we go into a broader conversation, can you talk a little bit about, like the sentencing guidelines as it relates to white collar crimes? I know often we talk about only from, the drug crime side, but I want people to understand that, there are guidelines based on loss amounts. If you just go into a little bit about that, and like, what are some of the white collar crimes? And if you've seen, I know I have, where there are disparities between the way women are being sentenced for crimes versus men.
Yeah, sure. First of all, the sentencing guidelines, can people hear me? Okay, okay, good. The sentencing guidelines at this point in time they are no longer mandatory. That means the judge does not have to follow them anymore. But nevertheless, most prosecutors' offices are still using them and referencing them as if they are mandatory and are recommending sentences within the guidelines. And when you get to financial crimes, it's really most of your sentence is driven by both your criminal history, which in a white collar case, most defendants don't have a criminal history. So the real driver of your sentence turns out to be what the loss amount is, the amount of money involved. And again, I think Elise's case is a good example of the fact that more and more you see prosecutors looking for huge loss amounts. They're paper losses. They're not real losses that any institution or any person has actually suffered. And, they're in many cases looking for headlines and really failing to look at the end sentence and say, does this person really need to be in jail for 6 or 7 years for committing? I mean, I think the prosecution, if I'm not mistaken, was asking for 6 years or something like that. 10 years, yeah, for Elise. I mean, it's outrageous, and particularly when you compare it to, I mean, you have people who are engaged in violent crimes who are not doing that much time. And, in terms of sentencing disparities, I think you do see it, and you see it. The good thing, and one of the reasons why the sentencing guidelines were put into place initially, was there was a feeling that judges had too much discretion, and that the result was there was a huge disparity between like people who had committed crimes. The problem, but they became unduly harsh, and I think they became particularly unduly harsh first in the drug arena and then later in the white collar arena as a response to whether it's a financial crisis, or if you go back to the 80s and the war on drugs, so to speak, what people thought was a drug crisis. But what you are seeing is, you are definitely seeing a disparity in terms of women versus men. But I mean, I think more disturbing and more apparent is a disparity between Black and brown people and white people and how they're being sentenced. And I mean, the reality is still that most of the federal judges and a lot of the current Cook County criminal judges are white. And so they're able to identify with someone who looks like them, who made a mistake, yet when that same mistake is made by a person of color, they're just not able to feel that same type of connection. And, and I don't think they're intentionally doing it, but I don't think there is enough effort being made both by the judges and the prosecutors who have a duty to do this to make sure there are not those disparities.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you so much for, I guess, just really giving the landscape around that. I would tend to say that it is done intentionally around race and gender biases. I remember when I was in Danbury in the county, there were so many women who had white collar crimes there in the camp, and they started just like compiling data around, white men who had the same financial crimes as they did. And a lot of them were on home confinement, didn't even do a day, may have had their restitution payments, but that was it. And then these sisters were incarcerated and they were getting sometimes a decade, right, for the same crime, but having to serve the time and then still having to pay the restitution on top of that. And a lot of times the men didn't even pay the debt. And so the women would have to do the time, pay the restitution while they were incarcerated. And then when they came home, still have to deal with this debt. So I'm happy to see that we're getting some comments in the chat where people are like, this is a great topic and that we really need to start to think about these things, and that it's shocking and eye-opening because we don't talk about it often enough. And so I think we just open up the conversation to, the sisters that are here around, like, let's talk about it. What do we need to see? Like, what's some of the changes that you all think that we should, how do we approach this? Where should we start? So many different ways to do it. Elise and I were talking right before this about like where and what. I don't think that when I think about pretrial, for example, most often when you have a drug crime, you're arrested, you're given no bail. That's what happened to me. So you don't have an opportunity to fight your case from the outside, if you will. But with people who are on pretrial, they do. But then what happens is you're on pretrial 4, 5, 10 years, and none of that time is credited toward your period of incarceration. So you've already been under surveillance through pretrial for the last 4 or 5 years, and then you go into prison for another 5-year sentence, right? So that's double jeopardy. And then on top of that, you have this lifelong sentence of restitution, some of which you never see, $5 million, $26 million, but yet you are have to pay it for the next 20 years. So that was just a little context because I go on rants, but let's talk about what are some of the things that we should do. So anyone, take it.
I'll jump in again. My first thought was a lot of things in life are incentivized, and that is also true in the criminal justice system to a degree. But as we quickly learned when we released, there was that additional 20-year sentence with the restitution. And the reason we became more aware of it, you probably had some sense of it when you first entered your institution, but when you release, what becomes very real for you is it is public record. And by public record, those of you who've experienced a lien in your life, a lien gets recorded with your local county recorder of deeds, in our case, Cook County, if you live locally. So anybody who does a name search on you, a public record search, that's gonna pop up and they're gonna see you as a bad risk. So time and time again, it's gonna be almost like a noose around your neck. As an incentive, as a returning citizen, and this frankly model should be considered for the world, if you are compliant as Roxanne stressed, meaning you're making your restitution payments, you're following your path for reentry as far as your first goal is finding employment, finding housing. If you're ticking off all those steps and you're found in compliance with those things, they should not go to lien. They should hold off on that lien and making that public record and effectively putting that noose around your neck. You're effectively incentivized to stay compliant if that does not become public record. Moreover, there can be a time period. Most of us who release had good behavior, so we got out earlier, we released the halfway houses, and then you do what in the federal system, what's called supervised release, commonly known as parole in the state system. The duration of that lien, if they do go public record, can be the duration of your supervised release. In most of our cases, we had anywhere from 1 to 3 years, and you could get off for half that time for good behavior, which oftentimes can be dependent on your judge, but that's a whole nother conversation. But the point is there are ways to incentivize this and not to make it an additional sentence, to be a little bit more creative that I think the Justice Department should consider and possibly might have to be driven from the legislative level, which is why we were making it a policy issue, which is a specialty of LOHM and Topeka's group.
Thank you so much, Lori, for all of that context. It was just making me think about, what you were saying in the very beginning, right? Like, how do we even have someone, if you're making your restitution payments, why is this a lien? Like, typically, you don't go to collections, right, if you will, unless you actually aren't paying the debt. So why is it already assumed that you're not going to pay the debt? You get this lien and then it's already public record. And then that kills your credit, kills any opportunity, not only of getting housing, but sometimes even a job, right? People aren't going to hire you. Remember, there was a time when they did not hire you if there were certain things that were on your credit. So that point was really, really brilliant to think, for us to begin to think through, because as we think about policies, often, you throw a bunch of things out and see what actually sticks. But that's something that seems to me that can be easily taken care of, just as it relates to really trying to humanize and give people that second chance. There was a question in the chat. I wanted to go to that really, really quick. And I'm not going to answer that because I'm not the attorney. So I guess I'm going to give that to Eric. But it's, where does the restitution that's paid actually go if there is no real lost amount? Does DOJ get the money? Who gets the money?
Okay, so here's what's supposed to happen. The money goes to the victim, which is identified by probation in a probation report, and then that becomes part of your sentence. That money, now in some cases, I'll again just go to Elise's case for a sec. The prosecution had given the court a list of, I don't remember, maybe 10 or 15 victims. We actually went through that list to show that none of those 10 to 15 banks lost any money. And that in fact, those banks in most cases had transferred those loans shortly after they were made into to other banks that then packaged them into mortgage-backed securities and were sold on the market. And it was, in our view, nearly impossible to determine who the real victims are and where that money would go. I'll give you another example. I represented another company that company has been defunct and out of business for years. I, as the lawyer for that company, which restitution was ordered for that company, I continue to get checks that come to my office. To be frank with you, it's extremely hard to track down who to even give that money to. Okay, so that's kind of the answer to that question. Let me answer a couple of the other questions that are in here just while I'm going. So legally, restitution is supposed to go to the actual victim of the crime. Restitution is mandatory at this point in time. There's a Restitution Act that makes it mandatory. One idea for reform could be to give the judges discretion again, so that is something a judge can consider, both your financial circumstances and whether the victim really deserves or should be getting that money, as opposed to saddling a defendant with a judgment that hangs over them for a long time. There's another question about being legal to hold someone in jail for over a year pre-trial. Yes, it is. They can detain, the federal government detains people for many years pre-trial if they're either a risk of flight or a danger to the community. And it can take it's even worse in the state system, where people are essentially still given cash bonds that the judge knows they can't afford over very, very small crimes. Another change and another option that's out there is an option for commutation, and it's called remission. You can file a petition for that. The only person that can give that, since it's legally required, is the President of the United States. So it is a very difficult, as Topeka, I'm sure that's not something that everyone has access to. And so there's maybe a way to make the remission process more streamlined and be able to allow people to, allow the pardon office to consider more applications for remission, particularly for people who have completed their supervised release, have made, and are making payments on time, in order to either amend the judgment, release them from the payments, or the like. So those are some of the options that are out there. But right now, it is very difficult to be in a situation like Elise and try to kind of rebuild your life financially.
Wow, thank you so much, Eric. I'd never even heard the term remission, so I learned something new today. You always hear about pardons or clemency on the federal level, so I had no idea about remission as another term and another act that people can actually take. So, you know, could be cool as a part of this coalition is also challenging that, right? Building, I think one is getting as many cases as possible. And putting in like a group application, you know, to the federal or to the president around that. When you have cases where I noticed someone else said that there was no victim in their case. Like, how are you expecting someone to pay back something where there's no victim to pay to? And you know, when I think of like civil assets forfeiture and different, you know, things that happen. Even in my case, there was over $1 million. That was seized in cash by the federal government, yet it was ghost drugs. There were no drugs. So you took $1 million and where did that money go? Right? It didn't go back to us and we all went to prison. So it's like really thinking about like who is then to be held accountable? Like you're really robbing people, regardless of whether it was a conspiracy or was a sting operation or whatever it was. That now you take this money, you sentence people, but then what happens to the asset, right? So I think that is something, again, in these conversations, it also gets my brain to start working and really thinking about, you know, how we, you know, doing class action lawsuits, you know. Again, I'm talking to a bunch of attorneys. I know nothing about this. I just know these terms, but I do know that there are ways that we should really think about how do we bring this to the forefront, bring so many people together with these type of cases where there actually is no victim as one way in order to tell the president, hey, like you need to just relieve people of debts that they don't owe when they've already paid their debt with their life while incarcerated. So I'm excited about this conversation. And so I think I have not heard from Roxanne and Callie, who are next to each other right now. So to you two, just really thinking about, we talked about legislation. We talked a little bit about the barriers in reentry, but in either of your opinions, what would you say like building pathways for equity really look like when it comes to people with financial crimes? Now, I heard you say, Roxanne, you know, if you don't want to employ us, we'll employ ourselves. We create our own businesses. That is what we do, right? Because we don't want those barriers. But then in creating these businesses, we need startup capital. We need investment capital. We need other things. And everyone doesn't have a nonprofit. People are really trying to build for-profit businesses. Like, how can we hold banks accountable when they're saying they're giving second chances, but we don't see that in the funding that they want to provide for us or even those opportunities? So what do you all think about that?
One of the things that we discussed was, you know, the new face, unfortunately, of criminalization are people that have education, that have experience. And so I would think that a better use of their lives would be to empower them to give some type of community service back to those in the same predicament. So Callie owned title companies, you know, Elise Law, Me Law, Lori Law, sounds like a bunch of law stuff, right? But our experiences could have been better used, you know, in those capacities. When I talk about people coming out of prison and being able to live, being able to get basic housing, being able to reunify with their families, it takes finances, it takes opportunities. And when someone won't hire you because you have a criminal background, even though, you know, it's supposed to be ban the box, but we have to create these other opportunities so that we can continue to live our lives. Listen, we all have some skill sets. You know, we're very unique individuals. And so what you have to do, and I tell people every day, what you have to do is look inside of yourself, see what type of skills you have, see what you can teach somebody else to do quicker than they can learn in a book, and create a business around it. I remember at the facility where I was at, I mean, those women could do artwork, they could knit, they could crochet, they could paint. I mean, they had full-fledged businesses going on there. But you have to take those same skill sets and monetize them outside. and create ventures for yourself and your families and for others that are following you. So we have to be creative in this space because we certainly can rule the world once again. And I believe that.
Callie, what are some of your thoughts?
So what she said. What she said. And she's sticking with it.
That's right.
It's so cute.
But
It is what she said. Yeah, thank you. It is what you said. But I would also like add, I was kind of teeing it up before around, we can't start businesses unless we have finances, right? And how we actually pushing back on financial institutions, lenders and things to one, they're the ones that actually can approve us for these loans, right? Like when I bought the house in New Orleans, I talked to the banker at JP Morgan Chase, and he was like, I told him that I had a conviction. He was like, oh, I don't need to know that. And I was like, what? Like, I thought that, I needed to disclose that information or they were going to ask me and they didn't. And because I was able, I had everything was in order that I was able to purchase a house. But I said, so many people can't do that. I mean, I didn't have a lien on my credit, right? I didn't have those type of problems or barriers, unfortunately. And then when you have the funding, you have the job, you have the history of employment, you have the history of payments on time, even with this lien, who has the discretion, I think, at these financial institutions to be able to say, like, look, we see what your track record is. We see that you have the ability to pay this loan. We see whether it is a small business loan and or a mortgage or an auto loan, right? Like if I can't get a car and my job are miles away, the opportunity, then how am I going to get there if there's no real public transportation in my area? So I just wanted to kind of raise that up because there's cultures within these financial institutions and other lending agencies that people who work there actually can change, right? The underwriters, they're the ones that actually can make those changes. And the ones who are over some of these financial institutions can make these changes. They're not all around, like, what is it, the SEC and other regulatory things on certain levels in order just to get approved for a loan. You're not asking to open a securities firm. And even when that happens, if you've done your crime and it's a new industry you want to get into, you should be allowed to do anything that you want to do. And so I noticed that, thank you for adding the form here, Eric, for the conversation forum. So anybody who's on here,
under the relief sought, one of the options is remission of fine and or restitution only, and that is something you can, unlike a pardon, you can actually file it even before your sentence is complete.
That's incredible information. I'm excited about that. And so Elise, what else would you like to add to the conversation? I know we're kind of closing in on time and I haven't seen any other questions in the chat that we have not answered, other than, yes, it is awful. And we do need to follow the money, track the money to see where it goes. And then, who actually needs to be held accountable. But Elise, what else do you think is necessary? And what should we do to begin to think about removing some of these barriers legislatively or otherwise?
Okay, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
All right. I think we've done a pretty good job of really kind of going over some of the barriers that we've talked about. Again, just if there was a time limit put on us so that we could move forward, like Lori stated, knowing that if you're doing everything that you're supposed to do, then at the end of X amount of years, then you are able to move on and get some of this stuff taken off. Even being able to negotiate a settlement. I mean, for those that actually did take money, being able to negotiate a settlement with the victim would be a good thing. What else, ladies? Anything? I think we have covered, the housing barriers. Again, having this background check is a big hindrance for a lot of people. I was fortunate that I was able to come home. A lot of women are not able to come home. They have lost everything. And so trying to get back on your feet, trying to find a place to live is a big barrier for a lot of women because of the background check. So, you know, the thing right now is how do we move forward? Who do we need to talk to? Who do we need to get on board to help us with the changes? And I don't know if, Eric, if you have any suggestions on who we might start targeting to get these changes made in the law. I'll toss it over to you right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think they're different for different, I think Congress is one place to start, and in talking, there's a lot of discussion on criminal justice reform that is taking place in Congress, and kind of getting together groups to talk about changes or amendments to the law, to make requirements, for example, in a lease and some of the other cases, to make requirements that, just like in Illinois, there are now laws that say you cannot deny someone, you cannot ask someone or deny them a job based on their criminal conviction. Maybe making those types of changes in terms of denying someone credit based on a restitution order that is in compliance. I mean, those are some changes. Also, maybe meeting with people in the Department of Justice to talk about ways to streamline these remissions, petition for remissions or commutation of the restitution or fine that are being imposed. I think those are some realistic places to start.
So can I ask you, who in the Department of Justice would we go to? Who would you suggest that we talk to?
I think that is something that would have to be done in Washington out of the Maine Department of Justice. And, I think you probably would want to start with the criminal chief, who is just in the process of being confirmed, and possibly the deputy attorney general. But, ultimately, it would be the attorney general making recommendations and sort of streamlining that process. Also, the White House counsel's office plays a significant role, because what ordinarily happens, prior to the Trump administration, what had happened for, over 100 years was there's a presidential pardon office that will review all requests for pardons or commutations. They will then make recommendations to the White House, and the White House will review those and act on those. So I think you might want to do a combination of both the White House counsel's office and senior folks in the Department of Justice in Washington.
Thank you so much, both Elise and Eric, for that. And I did see in the chat, well, actually, there's a question like, where on the state and federal level will we be able to find different legislation that we can reference? In the chat, Governor Pritzker here in Illinois has just signed an omnibus bill, HB 3653. They said it contains massive reforms. So it looks like Eric might be looking that up and is going to put that in the chat. But there's also like clean slate legislation around the country where it's being introduced for records to be expunged after a period of time when people have convictions. And these are things that are happening on the state level. Right now on the federal level, I haven't seen anything. This is why these sisters here right now are the ones that are wanting to lead some efforts around this, because they have all, including myself, have been charged with federal convictions. And so therefore, the state laws and things that are passed do not and will and cannot help, the situations that we're in. But what I do think, which is great, we can look at some of the local legislation that's actually passed, see what's in there, and then see how we can draft a piece of legislation based on the things and concerns that we have. And so what we do know is that Dick Durbin, who is also here in Illinois, correct? Is also, you know, one of the leaders on reform as it relates to on the federal level. And so I think, you know, getting buy-in for our legislators who are working in this space and have in the past, specifically around the legislation, will be things that we'll do through, you know, our work with EPIC and moving forward, or making sure that we're not only you know, working on the changing of the conditions of confinement, which is what we've done, but also making sure that we're changing some of these collateral consequence barriers, but also, you know, really looking at why are we incarcerating people? One, when there's ghost, I saw ghost dope and ghost paper restitution. Why are we actually having people pay back debts that they don't owe? Why are we, you know, incarcerating people who, to I believe it was Roxanne Point's skill set is better used in the community, right? Which again, opposed to sending to prison, can't do anything. And so I'm just really excited to have been able to connect with everyone here. I
Yeah.
see Gloria jumped in.
Uh-uh.
And so I'm just really, hi, Miss Gloria. Really excited that she's here. And if you want to just give a little bit of, just a little bit, Miss Gloria, because we know how you do sometimes. we have 5 minutes. So if you could just share your name, what your profession was prior to your incarceration, and a barrier that you have faced prior, once released, and how do you see a solution to changing that?
Okay, I'm sorry, repeat the last thing, you kind of froze out for a moment.
The solution that you can propose to change.
As far as the restitution, or as far as the whole thing?
Well, just one solution, either the restitution and or the whole thing. But we got 5 minutes. Now we got 4, Miss Gloria. You're late, Miss Gloria.
I'll tell you a little bit about myself real quick. I started out in basically the secretarial field and went to technology very quickly. I ended up teaching technology. I ended up working in the sort of the telecommunications field. So I've been around a lot. Being in business, I ended up incarcerated for 6.5 years. I am 69 years old now. I think that I have a feeling that once a person goes to prison, they've given you the sentence, they've said what you've done that harms society, this is your punishment, leave it out, you serve it, you get out, you start to do what you're supposed to do, and then nothing works for you. You can't, you know, you can't start your career, you kind of have to start at the bottom. I think that a solution is to have people be able to come back out, start again in their career, as long as they do it under the law. You've served your punishment. I'm not saying everything disappears, but I'm saying fairly allow people to return to society and fit back in. That's all.
Thank you so much, Miss Gloria. Wow, that was quick. I didn't expect that. I appreciate that. We all call Miss Gloria every week. And Miss Gloria, but
I'm long-winded, but
she got the prep work done. But this conversation was an incredible conversation. I just want to thank these powerful sisters here in Chicago and Wisconsin for joining us today, and everybody who came on. Thank you so much, Eric, for being a champion in this work. You know, supporting Elise in the way that you did. She was telling me how you took on her case pro bono, and just have been supporting her in this way, and just excited to work with you on making sure that we're making these changes for people with these type of convictions.
Thanks, Topeka.
So Absolutely. So thank you all for joining us. Until next time, please make sure that we are staying covered and lifted. There are things happening out here in the country, unfortunately, right now that are harming ourselves and our children, all of the hate and the harm. And, you know, when you think about all of these unfortunate pipelines that are ending through incarceration, and then the pathways that are being actually hurt when we're coming home, it's all interconnected, and it's all intersectional. And so, you know, please just be kind to each other, please love each other, and, you know, please open up these opportunities to one another. So I thank you, God bless you, and we will see you next time. Bye.